Hello everyone and welcome back. In this talk we're going to be talking about getting started with SailPoint SDKs. So what is an SDK? So SDK is a software development kit. This will make it easier for you as the developer to get started to leverage Identity Security Cloud APIs. So today the languages that we support are TypeScript, Golang, and PowerShell.
Hey, what about Python?
What about Python? Oh. Well, yeah, let me check that out. Let's see if I get a documentation here. Let's see if we tools, SDKs. Python. Yeah. All right. Well, yeah, we do have Python. So we did hear in the community that some of your preferred coding languages is Python. So we're going to be using that SDK today. We're going to create a new project through our CLI using Python, and we're going to configure it. I'll show you some of the basics, and then we're going to build something with it. So let's get started. So I'll open up my terminal here, and we'll do Sail SDK init Python. I messed that up. Let's see what's going on. Oh, I already have it. Let's see. I'm not in. Okay. Let's get rid of that old one. And let's run that again. Sail SDK init Python. There we go. So we got our requirements.txt and a simple starter script, sdk.py. Let's go into that. Python template. And we'll open this up in VS Code here. And that is probably super small. There we go. So here we go. Yeah, so this is Python, our Python SDK. So we will do import SailPoint. We can do import.v3, beta. We got a configuration. A paginator. We'll show you how all this works as we kind of build the example script. But yeah, so a simple example right here. You initialize your configuration object that will pull in your base URL, client ID, client secret, and then we'll do with SailPoint v3 API client. We'll pass in that configuration, and we'll use that as the API client variable. And then down here, when we're inside of that block, we can create an API instance for the transforms API, passing in that API client that's already configured. And then down here, we can do a try except, normal Python stuff there, API instance dot list transforms. So this will get all of the transforms with the v3 endpoints, and then for each transform, we're going to print out the name. So that's just a very, very simple example. But I'm going to show you how this works. We're going to set up a project from scratch. We're going to be using this one. I'll just start a new script here, and then we'll build this from scratch. So let's do that. I'll do a new file. We'll do test transform.py. So before I get started here, what I want to do is kind of create a new Python virtual environment. So I can do that with VS Code by doing, on Mac, it's Command-Shift-P, and that'll bring up kind of like the VS Code prompts where you can select the kind of like command that you want to run. So I'll do Python create environment. I want to use the venv. I want to use Python 3.12, and then I do want to install my dependencies. So this will install the SailPoint SDK. That's in my requirements.txt there. I'll show that. But it's installing packages. Let's show the logs here. Let's get rid of that. So there we go. So it's downloaded all the packages that our SDK needs, as well as the SailPoint package version 1.03. All right, so we have our virtual environment set up. If I go to the terminal here, and let's see here, I think I need to reinitialize this. Well, let me start seeing if I can just import SailPoint. Does that work? SailPoint. It's not access. Okay, it did work. So let's see. The first thing I want to do, so we imported SailPoint. I want to do import SailPoint dot. Okay, our IntelliSense isn't working. Let's fix that quick. What am I doing wrong here? Let me kind of back up here. Let me just exit out of VS Code here and open it again, see if that brings it in. Okay, there it goes. All right, so then let me import SailPoint. Okay, there we go. Now we got our IntelliSense working. So SailPoint.v3. Let's pull that in. The first thing I want to do is, so what I want to build here is kind of like a transform preview functionality. So we're going to be using the beta API to preview transforms. There's a couple other things that we'll need. The transforms API, search API for getting our identities that we want to preview. But let's go ahead and build this. So the first things first, all I want to do is build the selector for selecting identity profile. So I want to go out, get all of our identity profiles, provide those as a list to the user, and then select from that list and move on from that point. So we'll select the identity profiles, then we'll get back the identity profile ID. We'll use that to then search for identities, and then we'll go from there. But let's just get our identity profiles first. So that is a, let's see, beta endpoint will do that. So let's see, we want to first do configuration. Configuration equals new. Configuration. What we want to do, let's see if it'll import that now. So we'll do import SailPoint.configuration as our, actually we'll do from SailPoint configuration as import configuration. There we go, that's what we want. Configuration. Okay, so this is going to pull our client ID and client secret from my environment variables. I already have that set up in the background. If you're looking to set up the configuration, we do have steps here in the Python documents for setup using the CLI, or if you want to do manual, that's all here on the docs. And then I want to initialize a beta client, so we'll do beta underscore client equals SailPoint dot beta dot API client, and I want to import SailPoint dot beta. There we go. Now that's highlighted, and then we want to pass in our configuration object. So now we have the beta client. Now I can I'll do identity profiles API equals, I think that actually is right. Let's make sure that's beta dot identity profile. Yep. So beta client. And then I want to, let's wrap this all in a try, accept, and then Copilot's trying to help me out. I'll accept that and see if that actually is correct. Let's see. Identity profiles API. No, it's not get. We want to do a list identity profiles. And then what I want to do is use another package called Inquirer, and that will help us kind of get the input from the user. So I'm going to import that, but first I think I need to install it. Let's do pip install Inquirer. All right, so that's there. Let's add that in. Perfect. And then let's set up that prompt. I'm actually just going to copy this little snippet over, kind of speed things up. So, okay, we got inquire.prompt, and then it's going to prompt, it's going to create a list of choices, and then the message for that choice is select an identity profile from which you want to preview identities. And in that list, it's going to be for profile in identity profiles, so get back that response. And then the choice will be, it'll show the name, but in the back end, it'll kind of record the ID for us so that when we go call the search endpoint, we can use that ID. So let's just kind of see this working for right now. I want to just print out the answer to identity profile. So it's going to store that in an answers array, and then I just want to get that identity profile key out of that and print that out to the user. So let's just test this out for right now. And that code is super small, so sorry about that. You can probably see it a little better now. Let's do Python test.transform. So there we go. So it says, it kind of shows the little question mark there. Select an identity profile from which you want to preview identities. So it's not going to work quite yet, but if I do example CSV source, okay, there's my ID for the example CSV source. So if you watch some of my other presentations during dev days, I've been using this tool, but we're going to keep building it out here. So now I've got all my identity profiles. I select one. Now I need to use the search API to get my list of identities to then pass to the preview endpoint. So let's do that. Another thing I want to set up right now is the identity preview config. So I'm just going to introduce config as let's make a identity attributes. Actually, let's just call it attribute API. SailPoint dot, I think we want beta for this as well. Identity profile, or no. Yeah, let's do identity profiles API. And then let's do attribute API, get identity profile, and we want to pass this, the identity profile ID is equal to the answer of identity profile. So that'll pass in that ID, it'll go get that profile, and then we can assign that to the config. So okay, let's get, well, we assigned that so we can pick that up later, but let's do the search now. So I want to initialize a search API up here, and search is v3. Let's do search API equals SailPoint dot, not beta, but v3 search API, and then we'll need a v3 client here, so I can initialize that. v3 client equals SailPoint.v3 API client configuring. Okay, that looks right. And then we'll pass in the v3 client. That looks good. And then we'll also want, I think, yeah. So we'll do search equals SailPoint.v3.search. We'll initialize that object. Then we can do search.indices. The indices we want to search is on identities. We'll do search.query equals a SailPoint.v3.query. We want query, set the query equal to a formatted string. And then we want identity profile ID. I don't know. It's identity profile.id. And then we want that to be from the answer identity profile. I'll also add here fields name. So that should be, we'll add a sort too. Let's sort by the name. So these come back in order. You can see this these gray text GitHub Copilot's trying to guess how our API works. Sometimes it gets it right, sometimes it gets it wrong, but identities equals search API dot search post, and then we want to do the search, just pass in search, and I'm going to limit this to 10. That should give me enough identities to kind of transform or preview the transforms with and play around with. You could increase this limit to show more in the output, but 10 should work for me in this example. So we're going to do the same thing up here that we did for identity profiles, but for identities. So it's going to list out our 10 identities. We can use the up and down arrow keys to then choose that identity, and then we'll go on to the actual previewing the transform part. So let's bring in that prompt. So again, inquire helps us make this nice little list down here. We'll do identity answer equals inquirer.prompt. And then it is identity, select an identity to preview, and then, did I spell it wrong? Probably. Yeah. So for identity and identities, give me the identity name and the identity ID. And then once we select that choice, we'll get back the identity ID. So let's just print that again. Give me the identity answer. All right, so I've gotten rid of this little output, but let's test this. And now we should get the ID of the identity we're going to preview. This does take a second to go out and get our data. There we go. So we got, and there we go. If I click Amanda, there's Amanda's identity ID. So now we're going to get into a little bit more complicated nitty-gritty stuff. Let's do, so with the new endpoint, we're going to be using, let's go to that endpoint documentation. The beta endpoint And if I look under identities, I believe did I go in v3? No, it's beta. Oh, here it is, under identity profiles. So generate identity profile preview. So this is the endpoint we're going to be using. We pass it the identity ID, and then this identity attribute config. So that's the config that I got back earlier from the identity profiles endpoint. This takes an array of attribute transforms. So we're going to be building out this object next, and then that takes an array of transform definition. And now we're in the kind of the transform that you should be familiar with type attributes. And so this takes a reference to a transform. So we need to first upload our transform. So we're going to be pulling the transform from a file. We're going to upload the transform, create it, reference it with this identity preview call, and then we're going to clean up and delete that transform so that it is kind of like a true end-to-end test. We're not creating transforms that are just left in our environment. So let's write the create transform call next. And keeping an eye on time here to make sure I can get through this whole thing. So I think we're good. I'll just write it out. We'll do test transform equals transform, and I haven't initialized that. So we'll do transform API equals SailPoint.v3.transform API, and that needs the v3 client because it's a v3 call. And then we'll go back down. Now this should come up. There we go. And then we want to do create transform with HTTP info. So each endpoint has kind of two versions. One is just create transform by itself, and then create transform with HTTP info. So you'll see that I haven't used the with HTTP info for either of these. Basically what that does is it'll return you any headers, the status. So if you want that information, you can return that. If you want to check that it did in fact return your response, the correct response. Because I'm creating the transform and at the end I want to delete it, I want to make sure that the transform was in fact created. And then I'm going to pull that ID in so I can delete it later in the script. So I'm going to use that. And we'll do identity HTTP info. And that needs a transform. And so we'll do SailPoint.v3.transform. And then we'll do name equals data name. And I am kind of skipping a step, but I will go back here and get this data object set up. So name, and then type is data dot type. Actually, let's jump back and do that now. That way we can get in kind of IntelliSense going on. So I want to read the transform from a JSON file, and then we'll convert that. We'll kind of stringify it, convert that into JSON. So let's do that. I need the JSON library and the system library to be able to do that. So let's just do that up here. We'll do transform file equals, we'll pass it in as the first argument to the script. And then we'll do file equals open, transform file. And then we'll do data equals JSON.load. that file. All right, so that should give us our data. And now we're good back here. And then we need to pass in the attributes. So data, attributes. All right. And then, as I said, I want to make sure that that transform does get created. So if test transform dot, I believe we want status code equals 201. We'll just print that it was created successfully, and then we'll go in and do our other code. So the other thing we need to do is set up an identity attribute to test this under. So each object, or each, I'll log in and show this here. Might need my two-factor. Yeah, 1 second. All right, let's log in there. I'm going to go to admin, identities, identity profiles. We should have my example CSV one. I'll go to the mappings tab. So if you're not familiar with identity attributes, this is where you can kind of add them. So I'm going to be doing this kind of in the background, but I want to create a new identity attribute, and then I want to delete that attribute. So again, that it is a clean test, and we're not leaving identity attributes out there either. So the identity attribute, I'm just going to name it test, and that is what will store our preview transform value that it's going to be returning back. So let's get that set up in the code. So for that one, I need the identity attributes API. So identity attributes API equals SailPoint dot beta, passing the beta client. I keep wanting to put a semicolon there. Python doesn't need that. All right, let's do identity attribute. Attribute equals identity attributes API. Create with HTTP info. Again, that's gonna allow us to get the status code and any headers, and then the response as well. Let's do identity attribute equals SailPoint dot beta dot identity attributes. It's the first one, and we want the name equals test. Not test. And then the type for that attribute is going to be a string. So that should be all that we need for that one. And then let's go ahead and start building out our identity preview body. So for that, we're gonna kind of start in the inner part. So we're gonna start with the transform definition right here, this object. So let's do that. Transform definition equals SailPoint dot, that is a beta transform definition, and that takes a type is a reference. And then we'll do attributes equals, and this is where we need the ID of the transform we created. So that'll be just transform.data.name. So it says ID, but it's actually looking for the name. So you'll just pass the name of the transform in there. So that's the first part. Now we need the attribute transform. So this object here. So let's create that. So attribute transform equals SailPoint.beta.identity and that takes a identity attribute name, which is identity attribute dot data dot name. So that is, I could hard code this, but to make this work, we're going to just take it from here, but that's taking in the name test, and then it also needs the transform definition, which we created just above, and that will fill out that one. All right, so the next thing we need to do is now we've, I'm gonna actually call that in Postman. I think I have enough time here. If I start getting to the end and I'm running out of time, I'll just copy the code over and show you it working fully here. But and then this will be released after this presentation. I'll upload it to my topic on Discourse so you can download and try it out yourself. So I'll show that if I go to identity profiles, single identity profile, this identity attribute config. So basically what we want to do is I get the config, this config I get up here, and then I'm going to add to the end of the attribute transforms object my new transform object. So this is just an array of those. So we'll show you that here. So I'll do config dot identity attribute config attribute transforms. So that's my array I want to add to. We'll just append the attribute transform. Okay, so that's set up. And then the next thing I want to do is create the overarching request for the preview. So passing in the identity ID and then the attribute config we just appended to there. So let's do that. So we'll do identity preview. I need a new endpoint for that. Let's copy that over. It should be at the top. All right. And then we'll do identity preview request equals SailPoint beta.identity preview request, and that takes the identity ID, which will be formatted string, identity answer from before, okay. Then identity attribute config is the config dot identity attribute config. What did I do wrong here? Oh, I need a comment there, I think. Oh, I think I messed up my formatted string. Yeah, that's what it is. Okay, that works now. All right, so we got that. So that's the preview request. So we got the identity ID we want to preview. We got the attribute config of the list of all of our attributes that would look like first name, last name, email, whatever you have configured in your mappings. That's what will show up here. So that's good. Then we want to do identity preview equals identity preview API dot generate identity preview. And then we'll pass in that identity preview request that we just made over the past couple steps. And then that will actually go out and call the identity preview endpoint and give us back our preview. So then what I want to do is for attribute in identity preview dot preview attributes. Let's print out the attribute dot name. Copilot's helping me out there, plus the attribute dot value. So that'll get us our value. But what I also want to do, as I said, is delete that transform and delete that identity attribute. So let's set that up quick. Delete transform equals transforms API dot delete, and that should be just test transform dot data dot ID. And then I want the with HTTP info, that way I can make sure that it did in fact get deleted. So if delete transform dot status code equals 204, and actually don't need those. Transform deleted successfully. Otherwise, do that. And then same with the identity attribute. Let's see how close Copilot got here. I think it actually got it. So identity attribute dot data dot ID data dot it needs name, so it did mess it up a little bit. And then I want to check again if that worked or not. So delete status code equals 204. And then if anything went wrong in here, I want to, in the exception, delete these as well. I'll just copy those over. What did I do wrong there? Oh, I just named it Transform API. All right. So I think we are ready to go now. So just walking through this before we run it. Again, what this is going to do, we're going to pass in our transform file, JSON. We have our configuration initialized. We pass that in to create our v3 and beta clients. we set up a couple different APIs needed for this to be able to get our identity profiles, get our identities from search, and create our transforms, create our identity attributes. And then you choose from the list. We kind of bundle up that request for the transform preview, and then we send it off. So if I didn't make any mistakes here, here's hoping. This should work. So, oh, I should probably get a transform to test with. Let's see, let's do a new file, transform.json. Let's do a very simple example. We'll just call it name. I'm just going to copy this over. I think I have one ready. That will work. So here we go. Email tester is just the name of the transform. What it's going to do is concatenate a couple values together. First one's going to be first name from the CSV source. The next one's going to be the last name from the CSV source. And then we're going to put at the end of it at SailPointTest.com. So we'll do that. So now we have our transform, so I'll pass that in as the first argument. One thing I'll mention is you do want to make sure that if you're pulling from, if you're previewing an identity that doesn't have the source attributes, or the source name and attributes that you're looking or pulling in your transform, this will fail. I haven't really written much kind of error checking around this quite yet, but that is something that either you can add, or maybe I'll come back in later and add that in and upload that example too. But this, as I said, this code will be available to you right after this. But let's see, example CSV source. Let's preview it on Amanda. And of course, nothing works the first time. Can only concatenate string, not none type toString. None type toString. Email tester can only concatenate string, not none type toString. Well, I am running out of time here, so I do have the exact working thing here. So I'll just copy that code over, and then I'll share that here. I'm not exactly sure what I did wrong, but in the interest of time, I'll copy the working one and test this. And then I think it actually is going to fail again. So before I enter that in, let me go clean up that transform quick. I have about a minute left. Actually, I'll just rename the transform to email tester test. That should get us around that for now. All right. That. Amanda. Okay. Yeah, so I'm not sure what I did wrong. I'll figure that out. But so here we go. It did Amanda Ross at SailPointTest.com. So it did work. And so this is exactly how you can preview transforms, and it's just one example of how you can use this, and use our SDKs in general. But yeah, so I appreciate you watching. If you have any suggestions on any of our SDKs, if you're running into an issue, or if you're interested in a different language that we don't support today, please let us know. We do look at that quite often, but we'll see you in the next one.